now we got the rares. And start with black as always. And we've got Hagra Mauling, which it's just a basic, you know, kill spell. But the main thing about this one being the land forming, creating that Hagra Brood Pit token, which is really good. It converts to, or is it 2 or 3 gems to black? I think it's 3 gems to black, which is really important in especially mono black to get ways to get gems converted your way because it's a little difficult sometimes. But next one here. Okay, and then Soul Shatter, which is also an awesome card because it's untargeted and it can destroy vanguards and it also can destroy creatures. So um, there are some cards in standard that can replace it. Invoke Despair is awesome. You'll hear me using as a good replacement for a lot of kill spells because it just is. Even though it's more expensive than Soul Shatter and Hagra Mauling and all that, it functionally acts the same way. So Soul Shatter is great, but I think you can find a decent replacement for it. We got Sedgemoor Witch. Um, its main use is the Magecraft 2, creating 3 pest tokens. So there's nothing in standard that will create pests anymore, so there's not really a good replacement for that part of it. And then we also have Null Priest of Oblivion. Its main thing is being a cheap creature for with lifelink and menace, but its kicker is also pretty good. When this creature enters the battlefield, pick one of the first 4 creature cards from your graveyard, return to the battlefield under your control. Now, there's nothing in standard that's that cheap that will replace that, but I'm pretty sure there are some cards that bring creatures back to the battlefield under your control. Um, as far as cards with lifelink, Obscura Interceptor is a new card from SNC. It's a little more expensive to put out, but it has its awesome. I mean, Obscura Interceptor is a pretty good card, so yeah, to keep a lookout for that one if you don't have it yet. All right, blue Dragon Turtle. Now this is a card that will be sorely missed, but also will have a lot of people who love that Dragon Turtle is going out of standard. I'm thinking of you guys. But there is Dream Shacklegeist, which is untargeted disable if there's only one creature. Otherwise, it's targeted disable. So it's not quite the same. But while on the battlefield, the first opposing creature is disabled. And there's also Spell Queller, which I think is a blue card as well. So there's that. But the great thing about Dragon Turtle is it's just basically a like a claustrophobia in a creature. Way harder to get rid of because it's got that ward as well. But it's also not a really fragile support. So I will miss Dragon Turtle. I will be one of the many who does. Mind Flayer is a decent card. When this creature enters the battlefield, if you control 2 or less creatures, gain control of target opposing creature, which can really suck sometimes when you get your creature stolen from you. And when this creature dies or exiled from the battlefield, return all creatures you don't own to your opponent's control. So got that downside, but stealing a creature. I'm trying to think if there's anything that really steals creatures for you in standard right now. There is Invoke the Winds. I think that's the closest um, comparison to that, which honestly doesn't get really used very much, and it probably should, but it's not a card I think about very often. Stealing creatures just isn't normally my thing. It can be sometimes, but it's not an ability I place really highly. I'd rather just use my own good creatures and hope they don't get stolen from me. Uvilda, Dean of Perfection. This is a card that I think a lot of people who play with like ambiguity or something where you need to pop tokens such as Gnawbone, this will be really sorely missed for a lot of people. But when you exile a spell card from your hand, if you don't control a card name on perfection, I actually almost never think of that part of the card, but it's really about if not invoked at the beginning of your turn, each token support you control loses one shield. And since so many token supports are there to be destroyed, gold tokens especially, this can be a really good combo piece for that. So Prognostic Sphinx is the one that comes to mind as being the one that will replace this the closest, but I mean, it is permanent standard, so that's another nice thing about it. But yeah, um, this card only or continuously does it, while Prognostic Sphinx only does it on entering the battlefield. So not the perfect comparison, but pretty close. Test of Talents, another card that people will love to see gone. Also think gods will love that. But drain all mana from the first spell card in your opponent's hand, and spell cards in your opponent's hand can't gain mana. So really difficult for cards to be for spell cards to be casted when this is on the battlefield. And most support destruction is spells. But I think at this point most people know how to get around Test of Talents. It's still a pain in the ass when you run into it, but it's not the major shutdown that you think it's going to be, unless you're running raw, which a lot of us run raw for lots of different reasons. But since wizard classes rotating out of standard, test of talents, it's a great time for that to run out of to move out of standard as well. So echoing equation, I love this card. I use it for a lot of different things, but reinforce target creature you control 3 times until end of turn. If not invoked, reinforce target creature you control X times until end of turn. X is 3 plus the number of reinforcements of that creature. So great for tokens. Um, just a pretty solid game finisher if you need it to be. I use this card a lot in my legacy Omni builds. Helps me win really quickly. So pretty fun card. And there are a couple of cards still staying in standard that will reinforce your target creatures. There's Undercover Operative, which also gives a shield counter, which is pretty cool. So, yeah, um, great card. We'll miss it, but there are some cool cards that stay in standard if you are into that sort of thing. Cragplate Ballast, which is a green hexproof with haste. Yeah, kicker 7 when this creature enters the battlefield. It gains +8/+8. Can't have its mana drained or raised. So it's basically a poor man's Gaia's Revenge. And Gaia's Revenge is already probably better anyway, so probably won't miss it too much. Toski, Bearer of Secrets. This is a fun card. When a creature you control deals damage to your opponent's planeswalker, draw a card. It gains X mana. X is this creature's power. So this is similar to comparing Dragon to Zayatora's Envoy, which I would also say is a decent replacement for Toski as well. Whereas Toski, you have to buff up a lot. Zayatora's Envoy already does pretty well right out the gate. And the thing is, this one doesn't. This also has unblockable and prevent damage, which is cool too. Mold Shambler, really a good favorite for people dealing with Test of Talents and such. When this creature enters the battlefield, destroy opponent's non-land support. This effect can affect Vanguard support. So you can also get rid of Vanguards with this card too, which is great. And then you can destroy the next 3 non-land supports from your opponent's library. So that will hopefully keep your opponent from casting more supports unless they're using some sort of reanimator deck. So the obvious replacement for that is Conclave Naturalist, which some people use in conjunction with Multicolored just really make sure supports don't stay on the board for people. But pretty cool card. I don't use it a ton, but it's definitely got its uses. Kian, Dean Substance. I thought this card was pretty decent. When you activate a loyalty ability, create a fractal token that increases its level by X. X is the number of different non-land cards in your exile. Which that can grow pretty well, but I'd say most people use this card as the gem converter. At the beginning of your turn, exile the first card from your library. If that's a land card, this creature it's +2/+2, then convert 4 gems to green. It's an okay card, but I use like Selvala from PMA Green a lot more than I would use Kian anyway. And same with Circle of Dreams Druid. When this creature attacks, convert X gems to green. X is 2 times the number of green creatures you control. And then Pack Tactics. X is 3 times the number of green creatures you control instead. There's a ton of green gem converting creatures in standard right now. There's pretty much a lot of PMA green can replace her, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Inscription of Abundance. This is an interesting card. I do like it a lot. Target creature you control gets +3, then you gain life equal to that creature's power. So a lot of times this is just doing double duty for you. You get a buff, but more importantly, you get life gain, and you can possibly do creature removal with it. So it's a nice double duty card, and it's also got flash and then kicker. So nothing quite in standard that will replace it. But there's things like Boon of Boseiju, but it doesn't give you lifelink. So that's the only problem. Or it doesn't gain you life either. Roiling Vortex. I will be happy to see this go. At the beginning of each player's turn, deal 2 damage to that player. When a card player controls gains mana from a source that is not a match, deal 11 damage to that player. So many of my strategies revolve around gaining life, not or gaining mana from not gem swapping. So when Roiling Vortex hits the battlefield, I just get royally screwed with a lot of my decks. So I'm glad that this will go out of standard and I'll never really have to worry about it except very rarely in legacy battles, but not very often at all. And then while on the board, your opponent can't gain life. So that really sucks. Harnfell, Horn of Bounty. This card is a little bit underrated. I always kind of liked it. I got it fairly late. But at the beginning of your turn, you may discard the first card with mana from your hand, and if you do draw 2 cards, those cards gain half their mana. If you're not trying to fill up a card that gets immediate play, a lot of times I'll roll the dice and get rid of that card and get 2 new half mana filled cards. So that helps a lot in certain situations. And I like to use this in a discard deck um, to fill up my graveyard so that my Renin is it 6? Yeah, Renin 6 Vanguard will give me lots of red gem to convert in mono red. So it's a little bit of a combo piece for me. And I don't know if there's anything that I would say there's a comparison to in standard that will survive rotation. But I'm sure there is. I'm just not thinking of it right now. And then Valaka or Valakut, I don't know how you say this. Valakut. Discard all cards without mana from your hand, then draw that many cards +1. Land forming, create a Valakut Stoneforge token. So I think a lot of people play this to get that Valakut Stoneforge token, especially for Koth, who really lacks a lot of support slots. So you need to find ways to create lands for him without using valuable support slots. So I also like the discarding cards without mana from your hand for the same mono red strategy that I just detailed earlier. So I don't love this card, but I think some people will miss it. Um, Next one, Paladin class. Oh man. As much as I like this card, I think it's amazing. I hate when it's played against me, especially in Colors of Magic. So once this rotates out of standard, I think Colors of Magic will be a lot easier to deal with. I think you'll see a lot more perfects um, in that event. So giving everything double strike and buffing your creatures like crazy just gets out of control so quickly. It's a great game finisher. It's great for training grounds to get rid of opponents pretty quickly. So that's what I mostly use it for. And then of course in Colors of Magic to finish games quickly as well. So super overpowered card, one of the most overpowered cards in standard for what you get from it. Should be a masterpiece, but it is not. Teleportation circle. Um, I'm going to miss a lot of the strategies that you can build simply off of this card. At the end of your turn, you may exile up to one target creature you control, then return the first creature from your exile into play under your control with its reinforcements. So um, that obviously goes hand in hand with Savior of Ollenbach. So Savior will have one less awesome card to help things along, but we can replace it. Not as great, but we can replace it with Soul Herder. And also, there's a card, I think it's Mysterious Limo in SNC, which kind of works like Teleportation Circle, but it's not quite as good. But take a look at that card and see if you can maybe use it in the same way that you use Teleportation Circle. And then Revel in Silence. Uh, there's nothing in Standard, or even there's not that many cards in Legacy that do what this card does, but it's a great card. If not invoked until the beginning of your next turn, all support cards in your opponent's hand are disabled and can't be cast. All spell cards and loyalty abilities are also disabled when you cast this card. So it's a card that I don't use that often because you just never know how often you're going to need this card. But it's great against certain bosses, like a World Reborn, the third battle of the second node, where you don't want them to keep using their abilities. Well, really, any battle where you loyalty abilities um, are going to make it more difficult for you to deal with, I recommend this card. So, yeah, there's nothing really to replace it because I don't know if there really has been that many cards that do what this card does all in one. For only 6 mana, yeah, it's a great card. Ondu Inversion, nice board wipe. That also wipes Vanguard, so that can be cool too. Also, that land forming token. So it's a great way if you're in trouble to wipe the board and then give yourself a little bit of an advantage by giving yourself a nice land um, that helps you get back in the game. So there are things like Vanquish the Horde that will only destroy creatures. So in that way, and it's cheaper, and they both don't prompt you to cast. So you've got to be careful with either of them. Valkyrie Harbinger. This is a really good card. At the end of each player's turn, if you have full life, create a Vigilant Angel token. So those angel token stacks can get out of control really quickly. So this is a card that I like to use in popper objectives because it's such a good card. It's kind of like this rotation's Quartzwood Crasher. Not an amazing creature all the time, but it's really powerful and can get out of control really quickly if you let it. So similar to Quartzwood Crasher in that way. Arshawn of Emeria. When a player casts a card, disable each other card in the player's hand till end of turn. While on the battlefield, planeswalkers and card effects can't convert gems unless they're lands. Event rules of resilience. The part of it that I really care about is the first part, the disabling the cards. So it's a really good loop stopper. But with that wizard class around, I don't know. I don't know if we'll really need something so specific like Arshawn of Emeria. But I think you'll see this card um, used in standard for a lot of loop stopping decks. If you're going into Trial of the Plains, it's kind of nice to have it around sometimes. Guardian of Faith. This is another one that works really well with Savior of Olenbach. So losing Teleportation Circle and Guardian of Faith will slow down Savior, even though Savior is still a great card, even without these two cards in standard. But I think you will see a diminished value when putting Savior into your deck. But I really like this card for certain things. I don't use it a lot because at the end because when you enter the battlefield, exile each other creature you control. Sometimes you want all those creatures on the board, so you got to be careful when using this card. But it is pretty good. You can get it to be pretty high power though. Flump. This is a card I don't use a lot, but it can be really fun. Jellyfish, regenerate 3. When its creature is dealt damage, each player draws a card, then the first card in your hand gains 4 mana. And then renewal 6, at the end of your turn, all cards in your hand gain 4 mana. So there's a lot of ways to abuse this card. And it can be really fun. I don't probably use it enough, but I just have better cards that do certain things for that this card does. But still a fun card. And I think people who use this card a lot will miss it. Runeforge Champion, an easy way to pull auras um, out of your library and getting them used. So card goes really well with Light Paws, which is in Neo, but it's not a necessary card. It just makes Light Paws work a little better. Loyal Warhound. This is a card that I only recently started using a lot more. When this creature enters the battlefield, if there are 8 or less white gems on the board, fetch the first land support from your library. It gains full mana. So this is a card that's probably better in non-mono white decks because there will probably be less white gems on the board to grab that land support. But since I don't play with a lot of land supports a lot of times, I never use this card that much. But Topiary Stomper, I know it's green, but it's the closest thing to Loyal Warhound. I like that it's a first strike defender as well, with 5 power, so that's actually not too bad. Armament Master. This card was mostly used to buff Ajani's soldier tokens. Since neither Ajani's soldier tokens are that scary anymore, or Ajani, then Armament Master isn't going to be um, that missed either. And then Shale, Dean of Radiance. This is a good card, even though it's being bugged with that first strike thing, where if a first strike creature is destroyed by um, being dealt combat damage, it freezes the game. So there's been a lot of issues with that lately, but I personally almost never have dealt with that bug, only a couple times. So I use this card a lot in Zendikar expeditions. But other than that, I mean, there's other decent cards that are still pretty good. This one is fairly easily replaceable. And Sigrid, God Favored, it's mostly, I think, used for its enter the battlefield effect, exile a legendary support. You can't exile the first opposing legendary creature. It's a nice little effect, but I think Brutal Cathar basically takes the place of that. And the Valkmir Protector Shield. This is a really good card that I'd say the main thing is giving all of your creatures and your planeswalker hexproof. So it makes it really difficult to get rid of most of the enemy's threats. You can't disable it easily. You can't um, use Sigarda's imprisonment on them easily. So um, this rotating out of standard will make certain battles a lot easier. Then we go into colorless now. Not a ton left here, but we got grappling hook. Your first creature gains double strike, and when your first creature attacks, target opposing creature gains defender until end of turn. So it's a nice way to get double strike easily. And then if you need to destroy a creature, that's one way of doing it as well. If you're not using brass knuckles, it's probably the most decent replacement to grappling hook, even though you need another equipment on the board for to give you double strike. And then we've got all the all the Zendikar lands, all the rare lands. These are all going to be missed because they're all pretty good. You either convert 3 gems to a corresponding color to separate colors. So it also the activate the 2-turn things. Some of these can be really good. Flying and Vigilance. One gives you Reach, I believe. Raging Ravine. Yeah, Reach and Trample. So this was really good for a Johnny Stirring Wildwood. And then there's a lot of loyalty gem converters that we'll lose too. And there's also the AFR lands, which also had great secondary effects. Your first creature gets +4/+4 and gains flying and the dragon subtype. So I like to use this one uh, with Grandmaster Flowers or Godsmaster Flowers, if you will. And then Den of the Bugbear, I used a lot with Zariel. All Storm Giants, Hive of the Eye Tyrant, I like to use with Professor Onyx. Lair of the Hydra is a great mono green one as well. And actually, this one is probably the one I see the most used, Lair of the Hydra. Your first green creature gets +X/+X and gains trample. Do you know how much I love those +X? X is the number of green gems, so that can be a huge buff sometimes. Tyrite Sanctum, convert 2 gems to loyalty gems. Yeah, this is one from Kaldheim. And then, last but not least, explore the Vastlands. Not a spell I use a lot, but I know God's Master loves this card. Each player fetches the first spell or land support from their library. Each player gains 7 life, and each player gains 7 loyalty. I love that loyalty, and I think that's why Gauss likes to use this one. But I don't love all the advantages it gives to your opponent as well. There's a way to keep them from doing that, then it's probably a pretty cool card. And there aren't that many cards that give you loyalty just off the bat like that. Lord Xander is a good way to gain loyalty, but it's not just an instant thing. You have to wait till he attacks. But yeah, the Innistrad lands and the Neo or the Zendikar lands and AFR lands can be switched out for the Innistrad and Neo lands, and If you're somebody who plays lands heavily, you might love the intricacies of the lands rotating out of standard. And I do too. I just don't use them that often. But if you're a newer player that doesn't have a lot of different strategies, lands are still super important for you. So having also lands that can do nice secondary effects can be really important, and you still might want to use them even if you're not using lands as an overall strategy. All right, our multicolored cards, Rogue class. Most of the classes are pretty good. There are a couple of OP ones, and we got into one of them. But Rogue class is just a fun card. You can steal from your opponent's library. There aren't a lot of great ways to steal from your opponent library in once we rotate out of standard. There's Ashiok 2's ability, their third ability is probably the best way to get stuff from your opponent. Yeah, we're losing a lot of like rogues and stuff that steal from your opponent. But there's like Silent Blade Oni, which is a Neo masterpiece, but that's a tough one to chase because there's so much crap in those Neo packs that I don't know if it's worth it. But if you like Rogue class, you'll probably be really sorry to see it go. Skeletal Swarming. I really like this card. While on the board, your skeleton creatures gain Berserker and Trample. When a skeleton creature you control attacks, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each skeleton you control, including their reinforcement. So that can grow pretty quickly every turn. And at the end of your turn, create 2 skeleton tokens. Morbid, create 3 skeleton tokens instead. I never really pay attention to the morbid part of it. So I mostly just get 2 skeleton tokens every turn. Really good for token focused decks, creatureless decks. Yeah, there are cards, like Rabble Rousing, other like Hallowed Haunting, even though they're white. So I think like probably there's some PMA cards that make zombies, but nothing skeletons. I'm trying to think if there's anything that really creates skeletons, but could just be a one-off thing for the Dungeons and Dragons set AFR. And then Blade Historian. At the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control gain double strike until end of turn. Really great ability there. It took them a long time for us to just give our creatures double strike that simply for us. There are some cards back in the day that would only give double strike if certain condition was met. But Blade Historian just right off the bat. Not a card I use probably enough. I mean, it's red and white, so it can go in a lot of decks. Um, but yeah, there's other cards now. I'm really liking Jetmir. That gives your creatures double strike as long as there are, I think, like 6 creatures, including the reinforcements on the board. So I use it for that. I like that that Jetmir gives you vigilance and trample as well, which this does not. And then there's also what's the Kamiz? I don't know how you say it, but you can give a target creature unblockable, and then the creature who doesn't get unblockable gets double strike. So not as good for that, but um, at least there are ways to give your creatures double strike. All right, so those are all the rares, and next we'll do the uncommons.